I'd been putting it off, but it was finally time to clean out my garage. So on February 10th, 2012, I rolled my wheelchair out into the garage and began cleaning up the pile that had been accumulating over the many years of my life. As I kept moving junk, I noticed the Beetle light footlocker that I hadn't seen for years. It was still collecting dust and spiderwebs over in the corner under the window. It was an old, dirty military storage box that all of us kids were issued to keep our stuff in. It had been so many years that I had almost forgotten I still had it. Back in the 1980s, I journaled everything that happened to me during this time, and stored the journals in this footlocker. It was my job to draw illustrations and write descriptions of my experiences, as well as what my teammates told me their experiences were, and put them down in these journals. I rolled my wheelchair over to the footlocker, unlocked it, and opened the top of it. A puff of dust flew up in the air as the lid of the chest fell back. I could clearly see the neatly stacked journals were still as I had left them over 30 years ago. When I looked inside, I had forgotten how many of these I had done. Back when I had written these journals, it was a very scary time for our country. There was a Cold War going on between the United States and the Soviet Union, which is now Russia. These journals were top secret and could not be shown to anyone outside the government at the time. But now that Russia was no longer an enemy, they had been declassified and I was free to share them with anyone. It's strange for me to think that so much of my life was wrapped up in this little green beetle, which was the firefly symbol representing Beetle light. So these are the journals of my life and the lives of my friends during that time. This all started when I was a 12-year-old boy in a small eastern coastal town in the United States, with an old Indian name called Lightning Bow. Here are the Beetle Light journals, beginning with the first one that got the whole thing started. Beetle Light Journal number 1, Keeper of the Light. Chapter 1. This is my life. My name is Chris Richards, and I live on the east coast of the United States in a little coastal town named Lightning Bow. This is an old Indian name given to us over 300 years ago. Many people think it came from the special kind of species of firefly that we have here. Our town attracts tourists from around the world every June to see these little beetles put on their big light show. I'm a writer and an artist, so I thought I'd try my luck at writing a journal. This is my first, so we'll see how it goes. This is what I looked like when I was 12 at home doing artwork. One of my other favorite things to do at home was invent things. I'll get into that in a minute. As you can see, I'm in a wheelchair. I don't have the use of my legs and I can't feel anything from the waist down. It's always been that way, but I don't let it stop me from doing what I like to do. Something amazing happened to me on Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1984. This experience was so out of the ordinary that it's the reason I started journaling in the first place. So here's what happened. If I wasn't painting, sketching, or inventing something, you would have found me hanging out at the Briarwood Rehabilitation and Training Center, where I spent most of my free time working out with some of the best wheelchair racers in the country. My goal was to someday make the racing team. We had the best athletes from every sport in the country training here for what is now called the Paralympics and also the Special Olympics. Briarwood was one of the top sports training centers in the country back in 1984, and I was lucky it was located right here in my little town of Lightning Bow. So I took full advantage of hanging out with these athletes as much as I could. As I said earlier, Lightning Bow is what the Indians had named this valley leading to the ocean. Everybody thinks that the Indians saw the flashing fireflies in the shape of a bow or something, and named this forest area Lightning Bow. I guess the name stuck because here we are 300 years later and we're still calling our town Lightning Bow. Our particular species of firefly does something very special. Every year tourists come from all over the world to our town to see them for 2 weeks in June when they put on their show. This species of firefly is famous for synchronized flashing, or flashing at the same time. This is a big deal, and our town makes a lot of money from these tourists, so the fireflies are protected here, and they're important to our economy. We have so many of these lightning bugs and tourists that our town has a firefly festival every summer. All of the kids in town collect fireflies in jars, and on the night of the festival everyone opens their jars to let the fireflies take off up into the air together. They make the biggest light show you've ever seen. It's really cool. I don't know, but I guess that's where they got the name Beetle Light. This brings me to the secret world of Beetle Light. In the back of the Briarwood Training Center and over the hill from our town, there used to be an old rock quarry pit, bigger than the size of a large football stadium. It was now a secret area behind a security fence with an electronically locked gate. This gate had the Beetle light firefly symbol on it. If you were wondering who they were, no one knew for sure. But I would soon find out what Beetle light was. This is the beginning of how I found out what goes on behind that mysterious security gate with the little green beetle on it. The security gate was off limits to everyone but a few select people. Some of these people I had seen training at Briarwood. No one knew who they were or what went on behind the Beetle light gate. It looked like some kind of government operations area, but no one without a special Beetle light electronic card could get past the guard to find out what went on inside. Some people in town had flown over the secret area, reported seeing a giant glass dome of some sort. It was constructed over the huge quarry pit. That was the only information anyone knew about this strange place. Many years ago they cut giant stones of granite here for different construction projects around the country. The quarry pit went out of business sometime in the 1940s, I think, and the forest had taken over much of it these days. There was a rumor, however, that the Department of the Interior was using it for some kind of endangered animal project, having to do with preserving our particular species of firefly, but no one really knew for sure. Maybe that's why they called it Beetle Light. I had seen black helicopters land behind the fence in the past, along with government-looking cars driving through the front gate. I was dying to see what was going on in there. I'll talk about all of this some more later. So, back to my world. As a kid, I was an inventor, an artist, and I wanted to be a wheelchair racer. I hoped to race one of my inventions. I called it a wheel racer. My goal was to make the team and enter my invention in the 1988 Paralympics. More than that, I wanted to be able to keep up with my friends that raced their bikes down Monument Hill, one of the steepest hills in our town. I was tired of being left behind when the guys would take off riding after school. That's why I invented my wheel racer in the first place. Well, that, and I wanted to impress a certain girl I liked. She worked out at the Briarwood Training Center. More about her later. At the time, I was still working out the bugs in my wheel racer, but it was fast, real fast. I would take it down some pretty steep hills, but it was a little tippy at high speed. It moved right along, though, with some special wheel hubs I invented to make it race faster going downhill than a regular bike. It was made from parts of bicycles, go-karts, and other things in my dad's garage. I sort of copied some of Bob Hall's design. He was so cool. He was the first person to enter the Boston Marathon in a racing wheelchair that he invented in 1975. He raced the 26 miles in 2 hours and 58 minutes with just arm power. My chair wasn't as good as his at the time, but I kept working on the design. There was a steep road that wound down through the cemetery above the lighthouse in our town. It started at the top of the hill and came down through the graveyard and ended at the old lighthouse. This was the best place to test my wheel racer, because there weren't many people or cars to get in the way. More important than that was my friends wouldn't see me wipe out if I got out of control. I had been at the cemetery so many times testing, I must have known every name on every gravestone there. I kept testing and designing and redesigning the wheel racer until I got it right. I thought I had a winner with the latest version I was testing that day. At the time I thought, if I can keep it from tipping over, which was the problem I was having at high speed, I would have no problem keeping up with my friends going down Monument Hill. My best friend was Chase Stoddard. He had a twin brother named Jeff who was in rehabilitation over at the Briarwood Training Center, but I never really hung out with him. He was kind of a brain, and we didn't have much in common other than both of us were in wheelchairs. I did like to hang out with Chase, though, who had the fastest bike in my school. I thought that if I could keep up with Chase down Monument Hill, all my other friends would want to race with me too. So I kept working on my design, and Chase was happy to help me with my testing, because he beat me every time. Chapter 2. It all started on Tuesday. As I said, I spent a lot of my free time at the Briarwood Training Center, where a lot of us with disabilities went to train for the Paralympics or the Special Olympics. Rosa, the cute girl in my science class, also trained at Briarwood on the archery range. She was the girl I wanted to impress by racing down Monument Hill with the guys. I used to watch Rosa practicing on the shooting range at Briarwood. She was amazing. She was training as an archer for the Paralympics in 1988. She hit everything she aimed at. I thought she would easily make the archery team. I hoped I could make the racing team someday too. I thought maybe we could train together. I liked her a lot, but she didn't even know I was alive. I thought if I could get the bugs worked out of my wheel racer, and Rosa heard how fast and cool I was racing down Monument Hill with the guys, then maybe she'd want to train with me at Briarwood. On Wednesday morning, May 24th, 1984, I was in science class, and it was so boring. My teacher, Mr. Toomey, was talking about the solar eclipse we were going to have later that day. During a solar eclipse, the moon passes in front of the sun, blocking out some or all of the light, making everything during the day look very eerie and strange. All I wanted to do was get out with my wheel racer and start testing on Cemetery Hill. In class, we had to make these stupid pocket-sized cardboard cutouts and stick a hole through them. This would show the moon blocking out and moving in front of the sun. The sun shines through the hole in the cardboard and reflects on your hand or whatever, so you don't look directly at the sun and hurt your eyes. Looking at the sun directly can make you go blind, so I guess it was a good idea if you cared about seeing the eclipse. Mr. Toomey said the eclipse might do some strange things to nature on that day, like affecting the tides at the beach or making animals act a little weird during the event. I thought, whatever. Man, was I in for a surprise. After school on that day, my friends rode past me on their way to ride down Monument Hill. I wanted to go too, but my wheel racer wasn't ready yet, but hopefully it would be soon. I always hated being left behind, but today I was happy to get rid of anyone who might see me test my invention, just in case I wiped out. My best friend Chase was cool though. He asked me if I wanted to hang out, but I knew he really wanted to race with the guys, so I told him I was okay and it was all right to go. The hill the guys were headed for was really steep, but Cemetery Hill where I was going was just as good for me. I had to test out my latest design where no one would see me before I could take on Monument Hill in front of everybody. If I crashed in front of everyone, I knew Nick Cavallo would tell Rosa, and she would think I was a loser. So Cemetery Hill was perfect for now. It was testing time, and I made final adjustments to the wheel racer. I transferred over to it and threw some stuff in my blue backpack, like a flashlight and a couple of snacks. I looped the backpack over the back of my racer and I was off to the cemetery. I was so excited to try out this latest design I could hardly stand it. As I sailed down the sidewalk to the cemetery, I did notice it getting a little darker. The sky had a sort of orange-gray tint to it. Then I remembered the eclipse was going to happen today. There was also a few more dogs barking in the neighborhood than usual. It all just made the day a little more fun and out of the ordinary for me. I was having a blast. I remembered I'd still had that piece of cardboard with the hole in it from class. I pulled it out of my pocket and held it up in front of me. The light shined through the tiny hole and hit my hand. I could see the moon starting to move across the front of the sun and blocking out some of the light, making what looked like a crescent moon on my hand. It was kind of cool. I guess science class wasn't that boring after all. I put it back in my pocket and raced on to the cemetery. I finally got to the top of Cemetery Hill, and I could see all the way down the road winding through the gravestones to the lighthouse below. These were the perfect testing hills, but I remembered around this one curve there were some bumps in the road that you had to watch out for. Roots from a huge oak tree had lifted up the road. After these bumps, it was smooth sailing all the way to the lighthouse. As I pushed off and headed down the hill, I started picking up speed, a lot of speed. This new design was way faster than the last time I was testing here. I really had to hold on and keep this thing from going over. My front wheel was wobbling a little, and I was still tipping as I went around my first major curve in the road. The wheel racer was holding together pretty well, but was way faster than my normal wheelchair, and I wasn't quite used to going this fast. I remember thinking I had to find a way to make it more stable at high speed. I came around another corner, and there were the bumps in the road I was expecting, so I put a little pressure on the left wheel and swerved around, missing the bumps easily. When I looked up, I saw a rabbit directly in front of me, just sitting in the middle of the road like it owned the place. I was about to run it over, so I grabbed one wheel and turned quickly off the road to avoid hitting it. Chapter 3. The Crash at Marion Stone. As soon as I swerved off the road to miss the rabbit, I was out of control, going about 20 miles an hour over rough grass. I was weaving through the gravestones, barely missing them as I swerved first left, then right. Gravestones were everywhere, and finally I just couldn't turn fast enough to miss the one directly in front of me. I crashed into it, hitting my head on the stone and overturning my wheel racer. Everything went black and I couldn't feel anything. I started to wake up, and things were still kind of blurry. To my surprise, my head didn't hurt at all, and I felt pretty much normal, just a little groggy. I remember looking down on my shoulder as I felt a hand on it, and heard someone with an older voice say, "Are you hurt, son?" I looked up and saw an old man carrying a shovel in one hand and a lantern in the other. He was using the shovel as a cane to walk and was kind of stooped over. I thought I was going to get into trouble for crashing into the gravestone, but he didn't seem to care at all. He said his name was Bertram Colby, and that he was the caretaker of the cemetery. He picked up my wheel racer and set it upright. Thankfully, it was still in one piece. I pulled myself back up into the chair, and he asked me what my name was and what I was doing out on a night like this one. It wasn't night. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was starting to get more and more gray outside with the eclipse event that was happening, and the lantern he was carrying was getting brighter as it grew darker outside. I told him my name was Chris, and I was testing my new invention, the wheel racer. I remember he said something strange. He said, "Ah, that's what he wants with you. You're an inventor, too." Bertram was pointing at the gravestone that I had just crashed into. I looked at the stone, and it said, "Marion McCready, the keeper of the light. He never let it fail." I looked at Bertram Colby and pointed at the writing on the stone and asked, what did "he never let it fail" mean? Bertram told me that this gravestone belonged to Marion McCready and that he was the lighthouse keeper down at the bottom of the hill. Bertram went on to say it means that Marion never let the light go out in the lighthouse, and there had never been a shipwreck on the rocks in the harbor at night. Ship captains could always see Marion's light in the lighthouse tower as they rounded the point coming into the bay. He said Marion McCready was an inventor, like I was, and he had invented a chair like the one I was sitting in right now. I thought, that's kind of weird. Bertram got serious for a moment and looked up into the darkening sky and said, "Marion died on a night like this one. It was May 28th, 1900. At the time I wondered what he'd meant. Later I checked, and there was an eclipse on May 28th, 1900. I think it was just a coincidence." Maybe. I was interested in what he was saying about this lighthouse keeper, and that he had been in a wheelchair and invented things like I did back so long ago. So I followed him deeper into the cemetery. I had to dodge gravestones as he walked and talked. As we went farther into the older part of the cemetery, he pointed out the gravestones around us and said, "I know all these people." I looked around and realized we were in an area of the cemetery where people had died back in the 1800s. I thought he must be some kind of historian to have known who all these people were. It was like the whole town from that time period were all around us. He was a very interesting guy, and I liked him. I asked Bertram how the lighthouse keeper ended up in a wheelchair. He told me that on November 30th, 1834, on a day like this one, Marion was up on the light tower cleaning the lantern glass. It was in the middle of the day, and it started getting dark. He looked up at the sun that was blocked out by the moon, lost his balance, and fell from the tower. I asked Bertram how the lighthouse keeper ended up in a wheelchair. He told me that on November 30th, 1834, on a day like this one, Marion was up on the light tower cleaning the lantern glass. It was in the middle of the day, and it started getting dark. He looked up at the sun that was blocked out by the moon, lost his balance, and fell from the tower. I asked Bertram if that's what killed Marion. He said the fall didn't kill him, but he landed on some scaffolding which broke his fall, but unfortunately also broke his back, and he lost the use of his legs. I asked how a lighthouse keeper could get up and down inside that old lighthouse using a wheelchair in the 1800s. He said he invented this contraption that carried him up and down the different levels. This was back before they turned the lighthouse into a museum for tourists. After the accident, Marion wanted to keep his job as lighthouse keeper, so he invented some kind of system to make it possible. I thought, how cool was that? Marion was just like me. If you have challenges from a world not designed for you, you have to adapt and come up with things that make it work. I like this lighthouse keeper. Chapter 4. Standing on Isabel's Grave. We stopped walking, and I had rolled over a certain grave that Bertram was careful to walk around. It made Bertram very nervous by having my wheel racer sitting on top of this particular grave. His eyes opened wide and he started shaking and rattling the lantern he was holding. As he looked at me, I could see he had terror in his eyes. "What did I do? What did I do?" I yelled. I couldn't figure out what was going on. He told me I was sitting on old Isabel Drood, a mean witch of a woman that lived in our town many years ago. I remember what Bertram said to me like it was yesterday. "You best move off of her now, boy, and quickly with ya." The way he said it sounded a little bit weird to me, but I have to admit I was getting a little freaked out and I wasn't going to argue with him. I backed away from him because he was getting a little scary all of a sudden. When I backed up, I bumped into Isabel's gravestone. Now I want to say right here and now, her stone was already cracked when I hit it with my back wheels. The top of the stone broke off and fell to the ground. Bertram really looked scared now. He looked at me and pointed down the hill and said, "You best get yourself to the lighthouse. She'll be coming for you now, boy." I looked down at the ground when I backed away from the broken stone, because I felt a little rumble under my chair. When I looked back up, Bertram Colby was gone. I was about as alone as I could be, and right in the middle of the oldest and scariest section of the graveyard. All of a sudden, this wasn't fun anymore, and I wanted out of here, and fast. I pulled hard backward with one wheel and pushed harder forward with the other, and spun my wheel racer around. I then took off as fast as I could toward the main road to get off this rough grass that was slowing me down so much. The rumbling was still coming from under Isabel's grave, and I could still hear it as I moved away from it, quickly toward the road. I wasn't watching where I was going because I was still looking for Bertram. When I looked forward again, I crashed into another stone. I got the chills. As I read the name on the stone in front of me, it said, "Bertram Colby, caretaker of the county cemetery. Rest in peace, our good friend." Oh, wow. Who had I been talking to all this time? I kept thinking, "Wake up, you're in a dream." But this didn't feel like any dream, and something really bad was coming my way. I didn't know what to think, but I had to get off this rough grass and back to the smooth road where my wheel racer could take off down the hill fast. As I pushed my chair as hard as I could toward the road, I kept looking back at Isabel's broken gravestone. There was still rumbling coming from the ground there. So many things were happening at the same time. I saw something start to form over Isabel's grave. It was a black cloud of mist or something, but was starting to take human shape. I was really scared, and I pushed harder for the road, which was about 50 feet away. When I looked back again, whatever it was that was hovering over Isabel's grave formed into an old woman wearing a black dress with long black sleeves. She had pure white hair, and a gray wrinkled face with sunken-in eyes that were really angry. Worst of all, she was looking and pointing directly at me. She raised her arm and pointed a bony finger that looked like a claw at me. I heard her yell, "You, boy, you did this," as she started walking in my direction, fast. She was walking around the gravestones that were in her way, which gave me a little time to get to the smooth road, so I could move faster and try to get away from her. I remember I was thinking I was dead if she caught me and sank those claws into my head. I was pushing my racer over the rough grass and almost to the smooth road when my front wheel finally came loose. Thankfully it was still connected, but I wasn't going anywhere until I tightened it up.